research. What are the impacts of trail building on an ecosystem? What's the best way to remove invasive species? So it's a win-win-win in many ways, and that's really the key to my message today. Just a few basic facts so we're all on the same page. It's about 1,700 acres of forested land last time I looked. Carol's sitting in the back. Please feel free to correct me. Over 40 miles of greenway. It's increasingly recognized for its recreational value. In case you don't know it, the KUW is a pretty big deal. For a city our size and the quality of that resource, it's very unusual. And it's due to a lot of factors, historical, and the energy of good people like Carol who have put this thing together. But it's really recognized in a lot of ways. And this is what it looks like. It's really interesting in terms of conservation biology because you've got some management challenges, right? As you can see from the colors here, some of it's owned by private foundations, some of it's a land easement on private property, some of it's city, some of it's county, some of it's state, forks of the river. And yet, it's all, there close together. And so what you want to do as an ecologist is unfragment the landscape. Because if you know anything about the environment, the worst thing we do is we fragment everything. We build subdivisions, we build roads, and that is bad for wildlife and lots of other things. So this is our chance to kind of do restoration ecology, which is a really very exciting field, to kind of piece nature back together again, not just make it into a place where people can go and walk, not just make it into a place where people can bike, but where people can go and enjoy wildlife they can't see anywhere else, and also as habitat for endangered and threatened species. As you might expect, Europeans and Australians are way ahead of us with this idea. The urban wilderness concept is kind of a movement in Germany. They're working really hard to take these old steel belt cities and replace them with wilderness. So the idea here is that we're going to try to connect all this and maintain these and work with these different stakeholders and try to make this a long-term sustainable project and also expand it. So again, my message here is what role can science play in this? Where do we want to put the corridors? How wide should they be? If we build through a relatively pristine tract of land, what will the impact be? A lot of invasive species, how do we deal with that? So great opportunity for UT students who I always take over and they really get engaged when we go over there. We do bio blitzes and things like that. So that's what it is and that's where we're headed. And you probably know it has a big economic impact in the millions, which I'll talk about later. Historically, it's interesting. The parcels over there have been exposed to all sorts of different disturbances. So I have already written a white paper on this, kind of done an inventory, and this is part of, I'll be referring to my research throughout this, which I did with Emily Zefferman, who was a postdoc here at UT with me. But you can see the diverse kind of condition of the parcels and the different things that they've been exposed to. But all these have one thing in common. They're all part of the urban wilderness. And this is the part where I ask somebody to basically try to, I don't want to say guess, but try to tell me what do I mean by a wilderness? Because that's kind of a loose phrase. It sounds cool if you're, you just want to, tell people you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're, kind of as an attraction for tourism. But what is it? How do we actually define a wilderness? Truth in advertising. So the two characteristics of a wilderness are typically something that is pristine, untouched, and something that is not managed. Right? It's wild. So we call this rewilding. Rewilding is you're not touching it and you're leaving it unmanaged. But the truth is that it's not wilderness in what John Muir would have called wilderness, right? Or Audubon. This is wilderness only in the sense that it's not managed for the most part, and we're letting succession occur. So the whole idea is we're not, unlike a city park where they're constantly mowing the grass, and so you're letting natural succession occur. And it turns out people like that. And it turns out economically that's really a big attraction to the city because the city doesn't have to pay for a lot of maintenance, right? So a lot of what's driving this urban wilderness movement is also economics. It's a good way to kind of deal with land that you can't develop and bring in recreational tourists and so on. So my talk today, We've kind of already talked about what it is a little bit, and then I'm going to kind of loosely talk about these 5 benefits. You know, why do we want to preserve this resource for future generations? And I'll talk about how it helps save the planet. I'll talk about the emerging trend of green infrastructure, which is a huge deal right now. I hate to use the word infrastructure at the moment. Politically. Economics, it saves money and it makes money. Education, nature awareness, and research in many fields. So hopefully I can cover all that in 30 minutes. So if you go to Germany or Australia and go to conferences on the urban wilderness, you'll find that it refers to brownfields, vacant lots, urban wasteland, just land that nobody wants. And you know, as I said, it's really just a good way to let this land go back to nature and figure out ways to connect it or enlarge it to make it a habitat. You take Detroit and Cleveland; they have lots of urban wilderness. You know, it's a growing trend. And as I said, it's less managed than average parks, and it often consists of spontaneous vegetation with a lot of invasive species. So it's not pristine, as I said, but you know, there's an emerging realization in ecology that non-native species are not always bad. You know, and I know Dan Simberloff would probably jump on me right now. But we have this concept called novel ecosystems, and it's really big in urban ecology. And here's the thing. Urban ecosystems are so disrupted that many native species can't exist. And in many cases, you know, a non-native tree is better than no tree at all. So that's kind of the thinking with respect to spontaneous vegetation. In fact, there's some good science behind that, huh?
So unless it's a Bradford pear.
Yeah, exactly. Or I'm not too fond of ginkgos either. But if you do good science, if you compare spontaneous vegetation with lawn vegetation and even a natural forest, the ecosystem services provided by the spontaneous vegetation is really quite high. So however you want to, I don't want to go too much into the weeds, pun intended. But if you look at carbon, you look at light reflection, you look at a lot of the things, water cycling, spontaneous vegetation is pretty good. So. Yeah, so basically it's looking at the ability of those weeds in your backyard to, you know, recycle the water and filter the water and purify the air. So it's not a bad deal. And of course it's kind of a gradient of vegetation in our city. So you have you know, a green roof on one end, which is heavily managed, gardens and managed parks. So what I'm going to talk about today is kind of wasteland areas that nobody really can develop profitably, and it doesn't require a lot of management. Doesn't require a lot of economic input, and it's still got a pretty high native diversity. So it's a good place. It's kind of a sweet spot for a lot of things we do in biodiversity conservation. So I'm turning to, do you want to ask questions as we go along? How do you normally do that, Mark?
However you want to do it.
Yeah, I prefer if you ask questions as we go. So feel free. Don't save until the end. Yeah.
Would you define spontaneous vegetation?
Weeds. Yeah, they're plants that disperse on their own. Yeah, so you know, clover, it goes kudzu, you name it.
How hopeful is it that you will get all these disparate spots hooked up? Is that going
Oh, I'll get to
happen?
that. I'll get to that. No, that's a great question. I totally agree. Yeah.
How do you define that as a wasteland? Or is it,
Yeah.
most places can be developed, it just depends on how, you know, how economically sound.
So basically, we're talking about land that nobody is developing, that is not profitably developed right now. So it's land, you know, you're talking, you know, East Knoxville, Market Square, just abandoned land that nobody wants to do anything with. And of course, I'll show you some slides, but you know, Detroit and Cleveland, those Rust Belt cities, are just covered with these lands. It's a huge deal. So it's only waste in the sense of economics. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And actually, that's interesting because, you know, the reason South Knoxville is kind of good for this is because it is hard to develop, right? For geological reasons, it's karst, it has a lot of sinkholes. There's a lot of reasons why, and it's on the other side of the river. So it's kind of, you know, I'll tell you a secret fact of conservation biology. Most parks are just places that nobody wants to develop. They're just, it's not because anybody really went in there and said, we need to park there because it's a hot spot. It's because, well, you know, I can't develop, there's no gold there, there's no fracking there, let's just put a park there. And so this is another example of that. So saving the planet. Now this is a really important point. As our population grows, which is causing a lot of environmental problems, most people are moving to the cities. So if you don't know it, the cities are where most of our population is growing in the United States and globally. And so a lot of what I teach is sustainable cities. It's how do we make cities that are actually going to help the environment and not harm the environment. And they're doing it for a lot of reasons, as you probably know. Better services, better jobs, better transportation. Same thing if you go to Mexico City, you have a lot of squatters. And so they're going to move there. And right now we're not doing a very good job of making our cities sustainable, right? In fact, I'm going to go so far and tell you that our cities are the main cause of our environmental problems. That's a pretty bold statement, but I'm really sincere when I tell you that our cities are the cause of most of everything that's bad. It's human health, it's water pollution, it's carbon footprint, it's food, it's extinction, it's deforestation, and it's because we insist on urban sprawl. Which began after World War II. And so we grow our cities sideways. And of course, we don't think about the fact that asphalt is a mass extinction. Nothing grows on it. Pavement, it literally kills everything. So it's more or less permanent. So what I'm going to talk about is the urban wilderness is a good fix for that. It's vegetation. It's the opposite of what we do that needs to be fixed.
Where is that?
I think this is Los Angeles. Los Angeles, yeah, which probably wouldn't surprise anybody who's been there. But our city is very well known for sprawl. Sprawl is a huge problem here, and so South Knoxville is an especially unique place because it has escaped a lot of these kinds of things that you see. So here's Las Vegas, and as you probably know, this is a huge burden on the environment in terms of many activities. So the criteria number one for a sustainable city is don't grow sideways, grow up. So you grow, basically, New York City is a good example of a more sustainable city because people up there have about 1/5 the footprint of somebody in Knoxville. Because they walk, they grow vegetables, and they don't drive these giant cars and live in these giant houses. So that's a big part of the urban wilderness attraction to me. So as I say, urban sprawl is the leading cause of climate change, water pollution, biodiversity loss, and many other things. So saving the planet is one reason why I think the urban wilderness movement is a great idea. And that just goes to show you in terms of the severity of impact and duration of impact, urbanization is the worst thing we do. I mean, if you log a place, it'll come back, the forest will come back eventually, agriculture, but you still have, carbon sequestration. But urbanization, virtually nothing grows on concrete, and it's a mass extinction. And we don't think about that. And it's usually just so we can drive our cars from point A to point B, and really for no other reason. And I also like to tell people something that I think is really interesting. Our cities are designed for cars, not people. You haven't really thought about it, but they're not designed for us, and that's why we have heart disease and road rage and everything else. They're designed for cars. Everything about it is for an automobile, and the urban wilderness is a good way to rethink that. It's a good way to say to ourselves, let's design a city for my needs, recreation, for my health, and that sort of thing. And that just shows you the extent of urbanization on the planet. It's obviously growing rapidly, and it clearly needs to be addressed pretty soon. Those are all the urbanized areas on the planet. So we call this the Anthropocene that we live in. So I'm still on my saving the planet mode. I'll wind this down in a minute. But basically, everything is accelerating, and a lot of us are concerned about where this planet's going to go, and fixing our cities is going to help a lot with that. And of course, climate change is really on everybody's radar these days. And again, about half of our carbon comes from our cities. So if we walk more and we do other things like live in smaller houses, tiny houses, apartment buildings, our carbon footprint is going to get a lot smaller. And so we actually have a name for this. If you haven't heard, it's been in the news a lot lately. It's called the Anthropocene. Anybody heard that phrase before? It means we're in a new geological epoch where humans control nature more than nature does. So we produce more acid rain, more carbon than nature has ever produced. So my point is that as overwhelming as this may seem, and if you're a 19-year-old UT freshman, it does seem overwhelming. When I talk about sustainable cities, they're like, a light bulb goes on. Wow, that makes sense. It kind of combines all these solutions into one thing I can wrap my mind around. So a lot of them want to become landscape architects. They want to go into transportation planning, stuff like that.
What
So
are all these data points then that you're tracking?
yeah, so
The things you were talking about before?
yeah, so you're looking at, you know, nutrient pollution, extinction rate, land covered by agriculture. Just different. These are different global indicators of the impact we're having on the planet. And then another negative for me is cultural homogenization. For those of you who travel, you know, what's more depressing than going to Hawaii and seeing the same thing you left in San Francisco? Not just culture, but also biology. You go there, instead of seeing Hawaiian ground birds, you see blue jays or cardinals or rats. So our current cities I think are having a real negative impact. And there's a great book, if you ever want to read one, called The Geography of Nowhere. It's about and the thesis is, you know, if every place is the same, why go anywhere? which is really true. So, you know, and the urban wilderness is again, a good fix for that. It's a unique place where we have, you know, things that are regional animals and plants that we can maintain and enjoy a sense of place, right? As opposed to, I mean, you know, you've all done this. You go to a city and you travel to a conference or something, and you don't even know what city you're in because they all look alike. You walk outside the hotel, you could be in the same place you just left. And again, the urban wilderness is kind of a fix for that. So this is what I think the sustainable city of the future will look like, and I think the urban wilderness is going to be a big part of that. And it's just the idea that instead of being gray and growing sideways, sustainable cities are green and grow upwards. So again, my focus today is on the green part. It's on the vegetation. Which brings us to my next topic, which is green infrastructure, which is all the rage in engineering these days and all the rage in city planning. And it's just what it sounds like. It's the idea that, you know, the city has a lot of vegetation, and you maximize that, and you do it because it has a ton of advantages and saves a lot of money. So it's kind of hard to see, but green infrastructure promotes health, education, biodiversity, climate adaptation. You know, buffers you against carbon, food production. Basic commonsensical things. I don't need to go in that. In fact, when you go to these meetings on green infrastructure, you kind of ask yourself, why didn't we just do this to start with? But what it basically means to an engineer is that if you have a flood, instead of putting in a pipe, which is what civil engineers used to be taught to do, they'll say, aha, let's build a retention pond, let's build a rain garden. And guess what? Not only is it more effective, it's a lot less expensive, and it also has lots of other benefits. I mean, you know, who wants to walk around a gray drain pipe all day long when you have some vegetation? So, plus, our own infrastructure is in pretty bad shape, as you probably know. I got this from my friend John Hathaway in civil engineering, who does a lot of green infrastructure. And this is actually the report card that was handed out by the Society of Civil Engineers. So these guys, this isn't somebody running for office. And you know, you can see that our energy infrastructure is a D+, our schools are a D. We're in pretty bad shape. Only really kind of a good grade is solid waste. So my point is that the urban wilderness is a huge part of our green infrastructure. And you know, if a lot of the money that the city is spending on pipes and gray infrastructure could be spent on these kinds of things, and everybody would be better off for it. Taxpayers and so on, because it would save you money.
Question, drink water, the D we have, the
Yeah.
water we drink is, you know, buying bottled water is ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's a major problem in pollution, is the bottles.
Yeah,
But the drinking water we drink is, how can we get a D? It's good drinking.
Well, it comes from the Tennessee River.
So?
And it has a lot of things. It tests fine most of the time, but there are an increasing number of microchemicals that are in very small amounts. And I'll tell you what the culprit is. It's all these pharmaceuticals like Prozac and caffeine and all these things that people pour down the toilet. Because we study that in my building. We have a lot of high-tech chemistry over there. And we have this is surprisingly large, high levels of things like caffeine and things that come out of urine and stuff that's in that water. Now that's not, you know, harmful immediately, but it is a health concern to some people, and that's why. And also, a lot of E. coli. There's a lot of E. coli. If you go swimming in the Tennessee River, that's not drinking water per se, but you'll get a rash quite frequently.
But that doesn't end up in the
Yeah.
It's not drinking.
Yeah. Jim?
When you consider something like the concentration of water pollution produced by a given size population, is building up preferable to building sideways?
In terms of, did you say water pollution?
I mean, won't you have a higher concentration because you've built up, and so the density is going to be higher than if you build sideways?
That's a great point. And actually, I'm not an engineer, but I'm like 99% sure it's better to build up, because all of my friends who work in water quality, like Sherry back there, will tell you that most of our water pollution comes from runoff, surface runoff, from thousands of different, people with thousands of different pipes. And if you could just get them all into one pipe, you could treat that pipe no problem. But the things that's really causing a lot of damage to freshwater mussels and fish are all these houses up and down the lake just running off herbicides at random. And so if you can concentrate people, it's a lot easier to manage that. I think that's the best answer. Now, if you don't manage it, it's going to be really toxic, but I think you can manage it.
So that ASC report card you had, is that for Knoxville, or is that?
That's national.
National,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. That's not Knoxville. That's national. So maybe that's part of the thing here. Maybe our water's. I'm sure our water's better than Detroit's, which is full of lead. So no problem.
You might make the point that building up puts the population at a high intensity per square foot. But if you build up and put the parking necessary in the building that you put the people in,
Mm-hmm.
then you get rid of all this impervious surface around it to park cars on.
Yeah, exactly.
And you've got to couple those two together to make the green aspect work.
Yeah.
And developers do not like to do that at all.
Yep. Yeah. No, the developers are a big part of this problem. They're in a rut.
They're the whole problem.
Yeah, they sure are. No argument there. So if you actually, just to give you a number, Philadelphia has been a good experiment with this, but they're solving their stormwater problems, by spending $1.2 billion on green versus $6 billion on gray infrastructure. So there's a lot of hard numbers, and as a result, there are a lot of federal grants for this. And again, this is money that maybe could potentially be spent on the urban wilderness, because it's part of our. In my opinion, it's really the biggest part of our green infrastructure. It's not just some tiny little stormwater pond that somebody puts up. It's absorbing a lot of rainfall. It's absorbing a lot of carbon. It's doing a lot out there. It's a big forest.
What's your definition of gray?
Yeah, so
Concrete?
the gray infrastructure is just kind of the traditional pipes and asphalt and concrete. It's just gray, yeah. So, building a pipe instead of building vegetation. And so, in terms of some of the benefits of green infrastructure, we have a lot of psychological benefits. A lot of people get more benefits in terms of recreation from green infrastructure, which I'll talk about later. And again, it's not just the wilderness, but our infrastructure includes green walls, green urban agriculture, suburban street trees. So all these go into it. But again, I think this is a really neglected or important part of our green infrastructure for all and we call those ecosystem services, right? The water filtration, the air filtration, the recreation. There's a lot of services there, which actually brings up the matter of money. And so the question becomes, how do we pay for the urban wilderness, right? And I'm not going to make Carol say anything, but she's been a fantastic fundraiser with Legacy Parks. You probably know Carol. Her work is fantastic. But something like this shouldn't constantly be a source of fundraising. This should be something that should be built into the infrastructure. So one of the things that I'm doing, part of my research, is to do user surveys. So when people go out and use the urban wilderness, we're asking them questions. And one of the questions is, would you be willing to pay $1 or $2 to maintain this high quality? And over 90% of the respondents say yes. And that's true of other urban wilderness areas, that people are willing to pay for this. So I don't know if that's where we're going to head, but that's a research question that might be helpful to people who work on this. And here's the urban, so this is Knoxville, here's the urban wilderness down here. Again, just making the point that here's our green infrastructure. And by the way, Knoxville has a lot more trees than most cities. I don't know if you know that, but we really have a lot of trees, not just down here, but all over. So, except for this, that's where we're sprawling out, of course. So moving on, economics is another big reason why the urban wilderness, it saves money and makes money. kind of already alluded to this, but we have 42 miles of trail, which is huge compared to other cities like Richmond and Seattle. So these trails bring in a lot of people, as you probably know. A lot of these people are bikers, and they pay money to come to Knoxville and stay, and they spend money on restaurants. And I'm not really big on social media, but I hear the social media, this is a very popular area for bikers to come. And there's all sorts of kind of networks where people come here and use it.
How much of the visit, I don't know if you've got this from your surveys, how many of the visitors are local versus
Yeah,
down here?
I'll show you some numbers there. Yeah, it's about 83% are local from the numbers we have, but I don't know. Carol, do you have any numbers on that stuff? Yeah, we'll find out. Also, this is part of the geology. The geologists in me just, one of the reasons why this is so great is because of the geology out there. The cars, there's a lot of uneven terrain, so it's kind of a good natural fit for bikers because, I'm from Florida, and, there's no geology in Florida. I didn't know what a rock was. It's just this flat surface. Biking is just really boring. You just drive wherever you, but here it's a lot more interesting, right? So that's why people come here. And the numbers are pretty amazing. We have 260,000 bicycle user days. I mean, that's hundreds of bicyclists every day spending lots of money. And the estimates are, with indirect costs, you're looking at $51 million that probably, certainly will be spent if it's not. So this is from a paper that Charles Sims did at the Baker Center. And he lives out there. And he looked at the economic potential. And this is only going to grow. So again, my point is, it's a good economic resource for Knoxville as well. So it not only makes money, but also saves money. And here's what I was alluding to earlier. We have this trend called the ecology of vacancy. And I don't know if you know this, but about 1/6 of the world's cities are shrinking because you have the Rust Belt scenario, right, like Detroit. And this is a common problem in Europe as well as the United States. But 70 major cities have 15% of their urban land is vacant. And that's, instead of sitting around, with homeless and becoming kind of derelict, what cities like Cleveland are doing is spending money on building a wilderness and connecting these areas and making them nice places to go. And when you do that, real estate prices increase as well. So it's a cheap way to manage that because it's unmanaged land, right? You don't have to spend money mowing the grass, planting ornamental flowers. You don't have to spend money managing it. So it's really the only management you really have to do in the wilderness, the main management is invasive plant removal, which I may talk about if I have time. But so here's Detroit, for example. As everybody knows, the inner city of Detroit, so everything in red there is just vegetation for the most part. So, it's basically, was a high crime area with all sorts of problems, and they're slowly turning this into an urban wilderness, parts of it. So it meets a lot of needs, and same thing for South Knoxville. It certainly isn't abandoned or anything, but as I said, it's not prime real estate for development as it is out west because of geological reasons. And then education is a great way to, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about because I do think it's so important. But the numbers are just staggering. I mean, as a teacher and a professor, I think you all are pretty concerned about overuse of cell phones and the way kids these days are just wired in. And you probably suspect they don't know anything about nature. Believe it. It's worse than you can imagine. So a survey of Texas high school students, 60% of them misidentified a possum as a rodent. And so here's a study that was done in the UK. Only half of the students could identify 2 of 12 common species. We're talking things like, clover and things that you would normally see. My own personal, I take my students outside all the time. You probably see me out here, but I always take them to a sycamore tree, and I usually have about 100 students. And so out of 100 students, I will often not have a single student who knows what a sycamore tree looks like. They'll look at that tree and they'll guess, poplar tree, is it a maple tree? It's a sycamore tree. It's a native tree. And that's, it's not like I'm asking them about some obscure plant. So we call this nature deficit disorder. Just the idea that it's a really a big problem. And guess what? There's no real incentive for them to not do that, unless we can get them outside and get them engaged and make it fun. And I think, and also science. If you're gonna be a biologist, you have to have an appreciation to experience the natural world. So one of the things we do out there are these bioblitzes, and if you don't know what that is, it's when you take some experts, some taxonomists, some biologists out in the field with a bunch of UT students and our high school students who volunteer, and you get out there on Saturday morning and you have donuts and coffee, and you go to IAMS, some other place, and you tell them to go look for snails or butterflies or birds or plants, and it's a lot of fun. And they really get into it, and if they ask you what it is, you tell them. And they also have their phones, of course. Can't leave without those. They have this thing called iNaturalist, which is an app where you can take a picture. And we upload our if you get on iNaturalist, you'll see where we've uploaded some stuff there, and people can identify it. So this is a win-win, right? Because it not only engages the students. I've had several people who declare a major after doing this because they really enjoyed it and never would have done it on their own. But it's good for the urban wilderness because we don't know what's there. We don't know, what's out there in terms of the invertebrates, the snails, birds, pretty well, mammals. But there's a lot of biodiversity out there that we just don't understand. So these bioblitzes are a win-win because how can you manage the wilderness if you don't know what's there, right? So last thing, like as I said, we can do a lot of cool research out there.
Can I ask
Yeah.
on that with the students and teaching them pertaining to the biodiversity? Since I've lived in South Knoxville since I moved up here, and we used to go to Iron Falls, and we see deer and all sorts of things. And even when I lived, we had major bat population over my country, and all that's disappeared because. And in fact, just in the last week, with all the grasses that were planted,
Yeah.
were killdeer were, nesting
Right.
and stuff, all that's been cut down.
I know.
So now we have one killdeer left.
I know.
That's just the last 2 years. But in teaching students, there's so much, it's just not an item, but we really are losing a lot of wildlife.
Yeah. Out there, right?
Because of this.
The development.
Because there's so much, there's so many people.
Yeah.
visiting.
And
And much more trash.
right.
So one of the, I don't know if in the research if there's been anything done in just looking at the amount of trash and beer cans, that are being dispersed around, and dog poo bags that people wrap up their dog
Right.
poo and then they throw it out in the woods.
Right.
And
There hasn't been much that I know of research on that, but that illustrates the importance of the wilderness itself and why it's so important to maintain. And so what you're talking about is obviously a real debate that's ongoing, and it's never going to go away. And it just underscores the importance of doing research to minimize human impacts. Because the thing is you can't shut people out, right? You want them to engage. It's just a matter of how much engagement there is. So, in other words, how many bike paths should you build? Well, to answer that question, you really need to do research. You can't just...
And do the research before something goes
Right.
in, so you can have a tabulation of what truly is there, and then if something is put in, what's occurring.
Right. Yeah. Somebody else said there?
Well, I have a couple questions. What's the name of the project that you're doing on iNaturalist so people can?
I think it's under IAMS Nature Center.
Under IAMS.
Yeah.
And is there like a governing body or group that oversees
The urban wilderness? Yeah, there is.
And do you develop curriculum for schools? They're just hungry for ways to meet their science standards.
Yeah.
And,
So there's something called the Urban Wilderness Alliance, which is the stakeholders, which if I don't talk too much, I'll get to. They have a report, and this is another very good aspect of this. They're very well organized and coordinated, but I'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to throw out another term. Have you ever heard the term reconciliation ecology?
I know Mike Rosenberg, the guy who wrote that book. Yeah.
Do you know him?
Yes, I do. He's a good friend. Well, he's not a good friend, but he's a great guy.
Okay. just recently become interested in it. But I think that the most important thing is to educate people from almost the day they're born until they just naturally grow up thinking that they are part of nature.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
they take care of it because it's as important to them as anything else.
Right. So I probably should move on, but reconciliation ecology is the idea that, you know, we can live in harmony with nature if we want to. But yeah, no, I totally agree. So in terms of research, we can ask really great, you know, publishable, good science questions. What are the impacts of trails on biodiversity? We can use island biogeography to plan greenways. You know, what are the best methods for? We can do controlled studies on invasive species management. So this is a report I wrote. I'll make this available to anybody who wants it with a postdoc on the, you know, to get it to begin to understand what's out there. So it's a PDF file, and we went out there and did some bio blitzes. We wrote an article in a journal called Urban Forestry about this, try to publicize the UW. And we discovered, you know, we built on, you know, some really interesting things. Like, believe it or not, cities actually have more species, more biodiversity than a lot of natural places. So this is data from Berlin. These are plants, but there are a lot of plants in cities. And of course, you know, why, right? It's very disturbed. You have a lot of weeds, but you also have a lot of ornamentals, and people bring in their cats and dogs and parasites. So it's not always a good thing, but there is a lot of biodiversity in the city, and you know, we should keep that in mind. And a lot of that biodiversity is located in places like the urban wilderness. It's in these suburban areas that are not paved over completely. And so, you know, you'll find a lot, sometimes you'll even find threatened species that use that as habitat. So the urban wilderness is a very diverse place, and it's a good place to teach people using this reconciliation ecology paradigm to get out there and do things. So the inventory we wrote, just very quickly, because I'm running out of time, we found that the urban wilderness is about 2/3 deciduous forest using a satellite, about 20% evergreen, and then some pasture. So you know, so again, we want to know what's there. So if you want to manage it, on our bio blitz, we identified some new things, some reptiles, amphibians, and things like that. Quite a few plants. And again, this is, I would say we only know about, you know, 10-20% of what's in that forest. Probably you know, 80-90% is just we don't know in terms of. So here it is in our own backyard, and we haven't really inventoried it very well. We have some endangered species. The berry cave salamander is very famous. So we want to take good care of those. And then we're compiling a big database, and we're going to keep track of everything that's living there, so we can help manage this better. And we're producing maps where the rare species are. Again, these are for management purposes. Many of these are cave species, which are endemic and you know, always pretty threatened. And this is one of my favorite things I wanted to just throw out there. In 2 weeks, we have money to fly a drone. And you might not be a fan of drones, but this is a special drone. This is called a hyperspectral imager. And what it's going to do is it's going to fly over the urban wilderness, and it's going to map the entire thing and identify all the vegetation to the genus level, which is going to save many months of work. So here's an example of how they've used these in Utah and Arizona. So it's going to produce a map that looks something like this, where you have sagebrush, rabbitbrush, wheatgrass, and even litter. So we have Eric Carr in the ecology department and Mona Pappas are involved with this. And Eric's a licensed pilot. And we had to get clearance from the FAA because we're going to be near the airport over there. And we don't want people freaking out because there's drones flying over their house. But we're going to produce a map that's going to show us not just the vegetation map, but what the genus is. You know, where the maples are, where the oak trees are. It's going to be really cool. I'm really excited about that. Exactly. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. Actually, we're doing 2 runs. We're going to get the understory in March and April, which leaves out first, and then we're going to get the canopy in July. Yeah. Yeah. We wouldn't get much. We'll get a little bit right now, but yeah. So ultimately, yeah. So I'm excited about that. And then we'll do a lot of work with invasive plants, and nobody likes that. So we're gonna be doing a lot of research on how to get rid of the kudzu problem. And we actually we did a separate BioBlitz for invasives, and all these red dots are concentrations of invasives. And we didn't survey these. That's the only reason they're blank. But we have lots and lots of invasives. So the research is going to be how do you clear it out. On a happy note, I think a lot of people have discovered that once you remove some of these invasives, the seed bank of native plants will come back. So once you can get rid of the kudzu, the native plants will just come back on their own, and hence the wilderness idea that let nature take its course. And again, mostly bush honeysuckle, English ivy, things that you're undoubtedly very familiar with. So we're going to do, so now that we know what's there, we can go back to these parks and work with the city and whoever, contractors mostly, to remove it and make it, more biodiverse. And I'm sure you know that if you want to promote diversity, you need to get rid of these invasives. And I'm not sure if you know this, but this is a pretty common way to get rid of kudzu, and it's pretty effective. So maybe we'll do research on better ways to do this and see how long it works. And then the last thing is just the user survey. It's really critical to understand why people go there and who goes there, because this is going to help you with funding and maintenance and putting together BioBlitzes. And there isn't a lot of research on this, I don't think, at least the people I talk to. But this isn't urban wilderness, but the reason people go to parks, to relax, to be in nature, that's probably pretty obvious.
Where would you find the fitness, like what the Heart Association wants you to do in that place?
So, yeah, these are motives. I guess yeah, yeah.
Sport, maybe top.
I guess sport. Yeah, sport. Yeah. This is a European journal, so yeah. I think they go sporting when they go exercise. But yeah, I mean we've already done a kind of a beta test, a preliminary survey, and about 2/3 of the people that we surveyed, this is at IAMS. We're from Knox County, not surprisingly, 86% East Tennessee. Recreation, 94%, mostly walking. Nature appreciation was 5.7%. So these are the kind of things that I actually have a master's student who couldn't make it today, but this is going to be her one of her projects is to this is hers. What she's going to do is her name is Mia Wavrik, so this is her work, but she has all the access points to the South Loop. So this is the only place where people can come and go. And she's going to we're going to have a user blitz, which means we're going to have about 21 UT students, so one student at every one of these access points. And wherever anyone comes and goes, we're going to give them a form to fill out. And that way we'll keep track of everybody coming and going. It's going to be a really comprehensive data set. And we're going to ask them questions like, what were your motives? How far did you travel? How'd you get here? And then how much time did you spend? And also their favorite parts of the trail. What do you like the most? And we can use
exercising number one there, so you got that.
Yeah. So we're gonna and then we're gonna and they can take it home and they're gonna mail it to us. And I think we'll get a better return rate that way. We worked with Mark Fly in forestry who does this for a living, and he says if you give it to them and let them take it home instead of ruining their walk, which they get really annoyed at, and then you give them like a $10 gift certificate. We actually have a grant to do that for Panera or something. Yeah. We'll let you know. Yeah, it's a pretty good deal. Go for a hike and get free good. And this is one of my favorite things. The user impressions. This is really interesting to me. What parts of the park do people really appreciate? What emotions do they feel? So this is kind of an interesting area of study. Do you feel happiness, adventure when you go to nature? And this one in particular is interesting. How does biodiversity affect your preferences and your perception? So I have this little interactive slide I wanted to show you all. So there are basically 4 different kind of natural ecosystems here. You've got your typical kind of managed landscape of somebody's front yard. This one's a little bit more, a little less open. over here especially. And then you've got C, which is a little bit more wilderness, but it's got some built structures in it. And then you've got the wilderness on the bottom. And so people were allowed to just basically make comments on which one of these they liked the most. So 1, 2, it's A, B, C, D. Which one do you think was most preferred by most people? C, D. Yeah, I think I have a selective bias here because you all are probably interested in wilderness because that's why you're here. Actually, the one that was preferred was the top one. Yeah, and it's these academic papers get really technical, but the people said it's because it looked like it was neat and tidy, and so that's so for somebody like me who likes wilderness, that doesn't.
Between 4 and 6, I was thinking that 4 looks like they took the logs out.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is a lot more. So these are the numbers, and Habitat A was the most liked, and Habitat D, the wilderness, was not liked so much. So I was kind of surprised at that. But the point is, me as researcher is going to be more of this. We're going to actually do this with the wilderness. We're going to find out what parts people like. So last thing, just to wrap up, there is an Urban Wilderness Alliance, which is doing a great job of managing this. These are the stakeholders, the Mountain Bike Club, and so on. They have meetings periodically where they plan things. And in fact, they came up with this big publication. I can send you this if it's okay. I'll ask Rebecca, who coordinates this. I'll send this out, I guess. But it came out in 2016. It's a 4-year implementation plan. So this is where the wilderness seems to be headed, and most notably is expansion by way of greenways. So here's what the map looks like. And this is kind of probably what you would have come up with on your own, right? I mean, if you want to expand a wilderness area, you connect the dots, and you do it with green space. And so that's the long-term plan. And what I want to do as a researcher is hopefully get involved and help with that in terms of inventorying what they're building through and what are the impacts of these trails, and maybe helping with that from an ecological perspective, right? And also the data we collect from the user surveys. What do people like to see, and so on. And then ultimately, this is my vision, the urban wilderness can be part of a larger wilderness network. The state of Florida is kind of already doing this, where they've connected a lot of their parks with greenways. And so ultimately, I would like to see the urban wilderness connected to 7 Islands, House Mountain. That's doable. Frozen Head. It turns out that the actual
Blunt County?
Blunt County. Well, actually, that's one they're talking about already.
There's a lot going, there's
Yeah.
a lot going on.
Yeah. And of course, it's tricky. You have to get permission, and you have easements with private landowners. But I don't see that as an ecologist. I just see the green. But the people problem is always there. So that's pretty much all I had to say today. I really appreciate your time. Questions?
The 4-year implementation plan that you talked about was instituted at least a year ago. Can you comment on how much it has stayed on target with respect to deadlines?
I don't want to bug Carol, but my perception is I think they're doing pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit of caveat to that. So the study that you saw was really the city's request to say, where do we prioritize our funding? So it's not what you say is a typical 4-year implementation plan. So it's a conceptual plan, and this was sort of our conceptual view of where we wanted to move there. So to just manage expectations, all of it is very much dependent on landowners and land that becomes available and accessible, because there's never condemnation, number one, and then all of this has happened sort of opportunistically. So the wood property was sort of 100 acres that we were able to get donated. So what you see there is sort of a vision as opposed to a master plan, just to set expectations. We know we want it to extend as far as ICK, include that as part of the urban wilderness, but how that occurs will be. And so I'm always very, very hesitant to put a line on the map. And so this is a little bit of a vague line on the map to say we would love to go through Brown Mountain, we'd love for that connection to Smoky Mountain Rail line.
Yeah.
But whether that line occurs the way you see that right there or not. But that 4-year implementation plan for the city to say, we've got 2 years of this administration, where should the city be funding and what do people want? And it was really sort of their guideline for their investment in the urban wilderness. And so they've chosen a couple of those projects. All of this is aspirational.
Yes.
So if you know people along those green lines and would ask them to give us land, we'd love that, and we'll move along a lot quicker. But and then the mural of Townsend is in the works. So it's always it's very much a collaborative moving target on where priorities occur, and that's just kind of the opportunity that presents itself.
And let me just introduce, this is Carol Evans of Legacy Parks. That's my fault. She's been a real prime figure in all of this, so we all owe her a debt, actually. But yeah, if you have any questions, she would know a lot.
Mike, that picture there doesn't come free. Everything on there costs money in real dollars.
Yeah.
There are four ways you can get that. You can give money to Carol's Legacy Park Foundation, and she does great work with it. And she leverages those dollars massively. Secondly, both the county and the city right now are planning their budget for the next fiscal year. If there are things on there that you want done, you need to talk to your commissioners and your city councilman to get something in the budget to start it. Now, you don't have to get money in the budget to start everything, but if you've got to do design, you get money in to do the initial design. But it all depends on the citizen input. The fourth part of that is the sweat equity that citizens have to put in to make sure there's some money in there to make that happen.
Yep.
If you don't do that, though, don't do those four things, you can't get it done.
Exactly. And I also want to mention the user fee that I guess I don't know where that's going to go, but anyway, it's always about money, right? I'm a department head, believe me, my whole life is money. Every waking moment, it's about money. Everybody wants money, and anyway, anybody else have any? Yeah.
Where's Iams on that park? On that map?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see. I think it's H.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's Forks of the River to the right.
Is the Nature Conservancy involved in any of this?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah.
No, this is kind of a local grassroots kind of effort.
Well, I wasn't necessarily speaking about the Knoxville one, but more.
The Nature Conservancy National is involved in those kinds of things.
Yeah.
National, and on the state level.
Yeah. So anybody else?
Maybe one more question, and then we'll have individual questions if Dr. McKinney can stay a few minutes later.
The iApp, is there, that sounds like iPhone, is there anything for us Samsung users?
Yeah, you can use it. I don't have an iPhone, and you just download iNaturalist. Yeah, the Androids have it.
Just search for it in any app store.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's really cool.
Usually when something says I.
Yeah.
You see it? Oh, yeah, no, you can use it.
And let's all thank Dr. McKinney not only for a great talk, but for the great work that he's doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, maybe I'll see you out there on the wilderness, right?